Before we start, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and recognise that these have always been lands where learning has taken place by storytelling and through the sharing of experiences. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Today's topic, there's a rapid growing scrutiny on the management of water in large buildings as part of a holistic sustainability strategy. Building owners and managers are now prioritising advanced water management practices. And in today's webinar, we'll hear from 3 industry experts who are going to give their take on how to improve water efficiency in buildings to drive sustainability. Our panel today is, you click slides. Our panelists today are Karl Welsch, Technical Officer at NABERS, Dale O'Toole, the Sustainability Innovations Delivery Manager at GPT, and Howie Mann, VP of Product at CIM. Today's agenda is going to have 3 presentations. I'm just going to flick through, hang on, there we go. We're going to start with Karl talking about NABERS Water and some commentary on that. Then Dale's going to talk about GPT's Water Master Plan, and Howie's going to talk to us about the role of technology and CIM's water capability. If you have any questions for us, please put them in through the Q&A function in the webinar software, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentations and during the panel discussion we have at the end. If you do have a question, please let us know who that question is for, if it's for someone specific. And with that, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Karl, who's going to talk about NABERS Water.
Thanks, Anthony.
Hey,
hi. Thanks, Anthony. Hi, everyone. I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to talk to you today about NABERS Water. I'm just going to share my PowerPoint slide. So today I'll be talking about how NABERS water ratings are used in non-residential buildings and how they can be used to improve efficiency. But before I get into the water summary, I'll just provide a quick recap of the NABERS program, which is now 25 years old. So a NABERS rating is a simple 6-star sustainability tool for the built environment, 3 stars being the market average and 6 stars the market leader. The NABERS rating measures impact, not intent. So the tools are robust. They use actual consumption data from a 12-month rating period. They're technology neutral, and our benchmarking process means that buildings across Australia can fairly compare themselves against other buildings, regardless of size, location, or operation. Our 5 sustainability tools are energy, water, waste, and carbon neutral. These 4 measuring the impact a building has on the environment, and the indoor environment tool, which measures the impact a building has on its occupants. So not shown in this lineup, but we recently announced the launch of our embodied carbon tool. So the building sectors we have rating tools for are shown here, with the water tools in the sectors shown in the blue box. We're currently working on an energy tool for retail stores and an energy and water tool for schools. So far, offices is the only sector to be covered by mandatory energy ratings, but interest is certainly there to bring mandatory disclosure to other sectors and rating types. The CBD team currently has a consultation paper out at the moment to gauge this interest. Now, the water tool and how it works. So our NABERS accredited assessors collect information about a building, such as floor area, location, and usage data. And the data is verified, for example, utility bills and validated submeters. The assessor conducts a site visit to verify everything matches what the paperwork says, and the rating is lodged with NABERS. The algorithm compares the building details with actual consumption from bills. It does its magic and provides a water star rating and a water report. So our favourite saying around here is what gets measured gets managed, and if it can be managed, it can be improved. So with the baseline rating to show you where your building is currently performing at, you can then initiate capital works or operational programs to target water efficiency to improve your rating. So water ratings have been around for a little while, and we've seen a growing number of rated premises year on year. Water ratings tend to be closely associated with energy ratings. It makes sense if you're getting an energy rating and collecting all the building data for energy, you can add the water bills and get a water rating. So NABERS offers a discount for doing both as well. So notable jumps on that graph in rating numbers can be seen when energy ratings became mandatory under the CBD program, and again when the program reduced the threshold office floor area to 1,000 square metres. So going back to the saying of what gets measured gets managed, our data shows that over the life of the NABERS program, the average water intensity has consistently fallen in the office sector. For more statistics on water ratings uptake across various building sectors and reductions in water intensity, I highly recommend visiting our annual reports section on our website. Our data insights team at NABERS do an awesome job collecting this information and making it interactive, so feel free to check that out. I mentioned before that energy and water ratings tend to be linked. In these graphs, using data from the past few years, we can see the close number of energy and water ratings. I've left out offices in this comparison because there's a different dynamic going on with office energy being mandated under the BEAD Act. So here's those figures again, but expressed as percentages of water ratings to energy. So we can see the average sitting around 90% mark for water ratings compared to energy ratings. Now, we love a good case study here at NABERS, and here's one from regional New South Wales, a great example of a mid-sized office that achieved 4.5 energy and a 2-star water rating in 2019. So this prompted the building owners to direct attention towards their fixtures and fittings within the building, and they installed data loggers to better understand water consumption patterns throughout the day. This helped them identify patterns and check for leaks. They also addressed some energy initiatives, and after 12 months re-rated and saw a 3-star improvement for water, which equates to about 70% reduction in water consumption. So here's a snippet from a water efficiency fact sheet that we recently published on our website. We put it together to help our assessors, facility managers and building owners get some good tips on the benefits of water efficiency and common improvements that we hear are helpful. The point here is that a NABERS rating draws attention towards the areas of potential improvement. Even with the most modern plant and equipment, buildings can lose substantial quantities of water through leaks that go undetected, inefficient tapware, cooling towers, and landscape irrigation, to name just a few. So a NABERS rating on its own tells you how the building performed across a 12-month period, but taking the investigations to the next level might include adding sub-meters, smart meters, or data loggers to really get a handle on water consumption patterns. And again, if it can be measured, it can be managed, and good management can lead to improvements. So in 12 months, you can get another water rating to show those improvements. There's also a financial benefit to be achieved, and we've quoted a couple of these savings on the lower right side of this page. Another resources that we have available is a free training course called Influencing Sustainability Outcomes in the Built Environment. And we put this course together to provide our assessors and facility managers some tools for influencing decision makers. It's proven to be a very popular course amongst sustainability professionals, and I'm happy to chat further about this if you'd like to get in touch with me. So also on our website, we've got several calculators. You can estimate a rating with the forward calculator, similar to how the rating tool works. And there's also a reverse calculator where you can start with a target star rating, enter building details, and it'll calculate the maximum water consumption for that star rating. And here's an example where we put some operational data through the forward calculator, which is based on a random shopping centre rating. So you can see the difference that a 1-star improvement from 3 to 4 represents in a reduced water consumption. So based on your location, you could then calculate the savings in cost and emissions. And that's my section on how NABERS water ratings are used in non-residential buildings and how they can be used to improve efficiency. Back to you, Anthony.
Thanks very much for that, Karl. That was fascinating. It's really interesting to see that change. And I think people often underestimate how much water is lost just through inefficiencies and from, seemingly small leaks, but the aggregation, and as those leaks aggregate, you can end up with some significant losses. So thanks for highlighting that and how the NABERS system can actually help people detect those, but also find ways to improve and move forward. Let's move on now. I'm going to hear from Dale O'Toole. He's going to talk to us a bit about GPT's water master plan. Over to you, Dale.
Thanks very much, Anthony. Okay, I'll just share my screen. My notes up. Oh, let's see. Start at the start. All right, hopefully that's all come through. All right, this morning, well, this afternoon, I should say, I'm going to speak a little bit about GPT's water master plan, and then do a little bit of a deep dive, I guess, into some of the key focus areas that relate to water efficiencies. So as part of my role, I head up GPT's water master plan, and it's a very comprehensive plan that straddles all key parts of our business, and it provides a clear pathway as to how we can deliver our short-term, medium and long-term objectives relating to water management. And one of those key deliverables is that we publicly disclose that by the end of this decade, GPT will be water neutral across the operations for our owned and managed assets. So it's a very big project, and 2030 is not that far away. Anyway, to translate the aspirational goals into what takes place on our assets, we've developed what we call water blueprints, and these include some key areas like metering, monitoring, non-potable water. Stormwater management is a really big one for us, so that's helping us to reduce the impacts of larger volumes of stormwater runoff that can be that can have a range of pollutants in them, and obviously also water efficiency is a big part of that. All right, so it's really important to ensure that water efficiency is integrated across all stages of a building's life. The design and construction phase is particularly important because it ultimately determines as to how the asset will perform over the course of its life. So getting things right in this stage with respect to systems, plant and fixtures is clearly important. Into the operational phase, it's really important to have regular inspections, servicing, maintenance, and even fine-tuning of this equipment to ensure that it's operating optimally. And then as time goes by, there are opportunities through refurbishments and major redevelopments to replace some of the older and less efficient type of fixtures and systems. Okay, so I might just now go through a little bit of some of the things that I've found in the course of putting together these water blueprints for the Water Master Plan. And these relate back to those efficiencies I was just referring to on the last slide. So in this first one, under design, got some images of cooling towers, and cooling towers are a great example of the need to get things right in the design and engineering phase. The design and installation phase. Over here on the left, this first image, you can see I've got highlighted what's called a inspection panel, and all cooling towers typically have one large removable inspection panel. This particular one's quite a fair way off the ground, and it will be very difficult to get to what's behind there, which is a lot of the fill pack and also the water distribution network. And that's really important because cooling towers must have good supply of air through the tower, as well as discharged at the top. The other design point I've highlighted on here, you can see this little arrow between that shows how close that this cooling tower is against the side of the wall, and there's a wall behind it that's also very, very close, and that's reducing the amount of airflow coming into the tower. The picture in the middle, you can see another cooling tower. This one, there's no obstruction to the air moving into what we call the air intake louvers, but there is a cowling fitted on the exhaust. You can see at the top of the tower. That's actually put in with sound attenuators to reduce the sound. This tower is located close to residents, but that actually has a very big restriction on the airflow coming out of the tower. Other things I haven't shown in here, but what we find on a similar design issue is making sure that you don't have very long runs of return pipework that are located above the height of the basin, because when the pumps shut down, you can see that water flooding back into the tower, and we see a lot of water lost via overflow. And also with respect to enclosures, you want to make sure that the discharge is protruding well above any enclosures and walls. Otherwise, you run the risk of short cycling that exhaust air coming back into the air intake side. Moving beyond cooling towers, I've got an image here of some garden areas on one of our office assets. And in the design phase, it's really important to specify indigenous and drought-tolerant species for what we're planting, because that will reduce how much water is required. And if you are looking at watering systems, we find that sensor-activated, like soil moisture activated systems, are much more water efficient than the set and forget timer systems that we see. Also design issues for fire service systems, really good at the outset to ensure you've got sufficient isolation valves to reduce the losses that take place when the sprinkler systems are periodically drained down. Okay, so I've just put a little bit in here about metering. Now, of itself, metering isn't a water efficiency measure, but it's critical at this time to ensure that you've got good meter coverage and also the meters are easily accessible. And this is one I've stuck my head above the false ceiling to see that this one is completely out of range. And similarly, in this important design phase, it's really good to have sound drawings. And this one is a good example of a pretty solid metering schematic. In the operational phase, we talk here about optimization and leak management. Typically for HVAC optimization strategies, they virtually always focus on reducing energy at the chillers, which is great, but that can often come to the detriment of water that's consumed and lost via evaporation at the towers. So taking a more balanced approach to those type of optimization strategies is quite important, but at the very least, understanding what the impacts of those energy efficiency strategies will have on water. And with respect to leak management, we think the best approach is a combination of having regular site inspections by cleaning or security personnel, coupled with trend data like out of hours data, which I'm showing on the screen here. You can see for one of our assets during December, we had a period of where our overnight baseload was about 5 times higher than what it would typically be. So that signals some good investigative work to correct that. And lastly, in this stages of refurbishment or major redevelopment, it's a great opportunity to upgrade older equipment like amenities. And for us, one of the innovative features we're currently looking at from a viability perspective is can we actually install or replace our gravity toilets with vacuum toilets. And it's the sort of things that people are familiar with on planes and ships, where these systems typically use 80% less water than conventional systems. And that clearly will have some great savings and uplift in our NABERS ratings. And lastly, for more broader CapEx related projects at end of life, it's really important to get your consultants to include what the impact to NABERS ratings will be, whether it's positive or negative. It's really important in the decision-making process. And as Karl was mentioning before, included some of those indirect costs, such as sewage costs or energy costs or water treatment costs, to help in the business case planning. Thanks for that. That's my section complete. I'll pass back.
Thanks, Dale. That was really, really interesting. Again, we just get back to that same focus on measurement, making sure you've got not just have metering, but actually accessible metering, which might sometimes be missed along the way when we're thinking about that. But also just to look at some of the different sorts of solutions you're investigating to reduce the water consumption. And to do that not at the cost of increasing your energy output to reduce your water output or vice versa. So, being able to balance those things off. It's been really, really fascinating. So thank you. Sure. Our third presentation for today comes from Howie. He's going to talk about the role of technology, which has been a bit of a theme for both Karl and Dale, even though they haven't been explicitly talking about the technologies, but Howie's going to take us on a journey through that. So let me hand over to Howie.
Great. Thanks, Anthony. I'll just share my slides here. Are you seeing that by any chance, Anthony?
Got it.
Okay, great. Thanks again, Anthony, and hello, everyone. I'm Howie, and I lead product development here at CIM. Just wanted to carry on from the theme that Karl and Dale mentioned, and it's absolutely apt. I mean, with NABERS' motto of what gets measured gets managed, NABERS has done so much for standardizing everything across the industry, setting that baseline and getting people to kind of move forward. And a lot of questions people ask is, well, how, now that we know where we are, how can we manage that? And how can technology actually help manage that? Is something I want to answer, and really touching on some of the things that Dale mentioned there on the design and installation phase and on the maintenance phase on metering and how to stop leaks. Like to kind of go in and talk a little bit about how technology can basically cover that as well. Just to kind of kick off, a bit of an introduction as to a quick intro to CIM. I think many of you on the call will be familiar with us, but for those that aren't, we're a software technology company that provides real-time monitoring of energy and equipment use in buildings. we work with customers all around the world across commercial asset types, from offices, shopping centers, to hotels, airports, and museums. And what our platform does is automates the identification and diagnosis of maintenance issues, so that the people who run the buildings, the operations teams, can move away from outdated maintenance activities to be more data-driven and predictive. And our ultimate goal, you see there on the bottom of the slide, is to help teams run better buildings. And ultimately, a better building is one that's sustainable, reliable, comfortable, as well as resilient. In terms of our solution, it really kind of cuts across 4 pillars in terms of how we get to that stage from outdated maintenance to predictive maintenance. First phase is collect, is using unlocking the data in the building, creating a digital twin, replicating all the sensors across all the meters and all the equipment from the building management system. The second stage is using AI models to basically run rules and algorithms to continuously monitor and diagnose issues that are happening on those buildings and all those sensor points 24/7. Ultimately, then on the improved side of things, what we do is we create tooling to help teams action, repair, and fix these issues. And then with all the data that we're gathering, it's important to be able to help people benchmark and report on how we're doing. So this is the thematic of how we do it, but particularly in the topic that we're discussing today in terms of water efficiency and smart monitoring, there's really 4 core benefits that we believe smart water monitoring can deliver, or having the power of analytics and technology can achieve. That's stopping leaks, as Dale mentioned, and really avoiding bill shock. Being able to improve the sustainability ratings. It's great seeing what Karl mentioned there, the big drop, 16% reduction in water intensity from measuring this. And that obviously leads to uplifts in water ratings. To that point, as just that great image that Dale shared of that meter up there, maintaining meter uptime and reliability is so critical. Just because you install all these meters in there, at the end of the day, you need to have reliable readings, and being able to have easy access to them, knowing when they're failing, is critically important. And an increasing trend we're seeing now with the installation and design of all this metering infrastructure is that landlords and operators are now being able to recover costs from tenants more accurately, whereas before they either weren't able to, or it was being done on an outdated pro rata type model. So if I kind of go through each of these stages in terms of how the CIM platform helps achieve this, in the first instance, we integrate with the smart water meters, the image that you basically saw that Dale had shown, integrate that into the one platform in the cloud, standardize that, and then provide real-time visibility on usage and not relying on manual meter reads. So that's kind of that first step, is getting all that data, streaming in real time, being able to actively analyze it. The second phase is on the monitor. Ultimately, the challenge, though, is that buildings have often hundreds of individual water meters that are constantly streaming water usage, some high, some low, some out of hours, and having to manually review that is just not enough man hours in the day to basically do that. So running algorithms that you can get from an analytics platform such as CIM to basically diagnose leaks when they're happening out of hours, higher base load, meters, faulty meters and unreliable meters is critical. And basically that's the way to stop the leaks ultimately. And then ultimately on the improved side, as we mentioned before, our guiding principle to building technology and product here at CIM is to make it accessible and easy for the people who actually run buildings to take action. And that's often an overlooked point. The operations teams and the facilities teams who are on site are constantly firefighting. They're on the coalface of trying to make sure that critical infrastructure is working whilst maintaining tenant satisfaction and juggling a million things. So them being that time poor means that technology needs to be designed to make their lives easier. And to do that, that needs to do a few things to ensure that the issues that are being monitored and diagnosed are genuine and matter to the team, and also that the tooling is in place for the collaboration to make it easy to fix. Sometimes it's a plumbing issue where a plumber needs to investigate it. Sometimes it's a issue with a cooling tower, a mechanical contractor might need to be engaged. Sometimes it's a metering issue and censoring issue that will require a BMS technician to basically go in, or a combination of all three to collaborate to solve. So making sure that's as seamless as possible is incredibly important. As we mentioned, having all this data is incredibly valuable and provides a platform that CIM is able to allow people to compare their usage across major consumers, comparing tenants, how much they're using, being able to benchmark changes and view changes in terms of how things are going. We're also releasing in active development of our new ratings feature, which will be coming soon, which we'd love to talk about maybe in the next webinar, where we'll be able to centralize all the sustainability ratings onto the same platform as CIM, including the NABERS Water ratings. That way, everyone in the organization, from asset fund sustainability manager at the portfolio level down to the site level, has easy access and visibility to all the ratings and documentation related to that building. I wanted to touch quickly on a case study, just a bit of an explanation of how this technology is basically used in the real world with customers. And so what we've seen is this big proliferation across a lot of assets. A lot of infrastructure has been invested now. Installing the hardware of smart water meters has gotten increasingly more affordable, and we've seen a lot more of that, and more of that's being basically connected now to analytics providers such as CIM to stream that data. So this is a quick study of a large shopping center and how they've used CIM for their smart water monitoring. Ultimately, they had 3 core goals. The first one was tenant engagement, being able to engage their tenants to change behavior on their water usage, as well as initiate a cost recovery program. Second one, as Dale mentioned, is to stop leaks. It was leak detection, being able to, this building had vast infrastructure of water meters, being able to find out where they are. Relying on people to do site visit checks was just not feasible in an asset this large. And sustainability, ultimately, their sustainability ratings saw a decline following post-COVID recovery and occupancy and increased water usage, which is a good thing for the center. But having increasing demands from owners to be, how can we push that higher, was absolutely a drive. So this was an amazing use case, being able to get such diverse infrastructure set up, over 135 water meters into the system on such a large asset, and then working on a program to initiate cost recoveries as well. So just a bit of an idea. I think one overlooked point from a lot of people is understanding where does water actually come from in a building? Who are the largest consumers? I myself had this misconception. You would think that it would be the showers and the amenities and the toilets and the sinks that would be the largest water consumers. I think it surprises a lot of people to realize that cooling towers, both in office and retail assets, are the largest consumers of water in a building. It can be anywhere from 30 to 50%. This particular asset was upwards of 50% of all the water usage coming from the cooling towers in the system. Then next is the tenancies. In a retail center, these would be your majors. The cinemas use an enormous amount of water for their tenant condenser water system and their cooling towers as well. And then, the big box retailers, the restaurants, then goes the amenities, and then finally irrigation. So knowing where your largest consumers are is incredibly important to have infrastructure and metering installed there, because leaks that happen there can have disastrous consequences rather than a smaller leak in a smaller tenancy. So having that information allows people, as Karl mentioned, what gets measured gets managed. So knowing where those things are, following the 80-20 rule, is critical. And as we can see here, just a quick case study of how it happens. I might just stop sharing here because slide decks are always boring. Let me just jump right into the platform and do a bit of a live demo of this. So here is, hopefully you guys can see my screen here. On the platform. So this is just an example of some of the usage that was happening across this building. Across the big orange line here, you can see that overnight huge baseload increase in consumption from the major cinema tenants coming through. And that really was not a leak. That was actually from the cooling towers basically running 24/7. So excessive HVAC cooling, poor controls led to huge amount of water usage coming through, bill shock. But having the platform through CIM, we were able to identify that leak, engage the tenants, and get them to repair the issue as quickly as possible. You can also see coming in from a major retailer, just a traditional plumbing leak happened, left unattended. That would have continued on for a long period of time, but they were able to basically action that immediately and get the plumbers into action and resolve. As I mentioned, having the data there is one thing, but being able to surface that to the frontline teams that are busy is incredibly important. So through the platform, you're able to see that just on this site alone, platform is able to identify overnight water usage coming in, and then being able to give the trend logs and the data logs to identify exactly when we're seeing that increase come in, increase in overnight baseload consumption. So having that metering infrastructure in place, having that monitoring in place, and making sure the teams on site are on board and knowing how to use this technology means you're able to stop those leaks before they actually happen. And so ultimately for us, these are the kind of core benefits that we see with implementing the smart water monitoring, is really able to stop leaks, improve ratings, maintain meter reliability, and also there's a P&L benefit as well from being able to recover costs and reinvest back into that infrastructure. I'll just pause there and pass that back to you, Anthony.
Thanks, Howie. Well, we've had a couple of questions come in for the audience. This is one of my favourite things, is because the panelists don't know what I'm going to ask them or who I'm going to ask next. So I'm going to start with Karl, and I'll give you what should be an easy one for you, Karl. One of our audience members wants to know, do you anticipate that NABERS Water will become mandatory for offices?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I guess in the water team within NABERS, it'd be great to see that. But I think that's something that will be led by the industry. The CBD team at the moment has a consultation paper out for interest in expanding the CBD program. So I think that they'll find out what the appetite there is from industry, and recommend the appropriate outcome.
I think that would be an interesting development if that does come about. And if it has the same impacts of what we're seeing from energy and emissions that took place from mandatory disclosure and energy, it could be fantastic. I guess the devil would be in the detail to ensure, especially from water, it can be a bit hard to differentiate how much water is captured by a base building versus tenancies. And at the moment, especially in retail, for instance, retail or water is considered within the bounds of a rating, even though the owner, for instance, may not necessarily have that operational and financial control. So I still think it's a great initiative. We just need to, obviously, if it comes about, working on the detail.
So just while you've got your mic on, Dale, one of the questions that's come in is, who are some of the main teams that you work with to implement your water master plan at GPT?
Right. Yeah, good question. Mostly it's our operations people, and that includes, when I say operations, that includes our people, but also our key contractors. So like our mechanical services, the guys who look after our cooling towers, our cleaners, our BMS contractors are really critical. And then our capital works teams and our development teams, but also leasing. So working with tenants, there's a big tie-in with how our leases, for instance, are structured. Yeah.
Right. Thanks for that. So, Karl, just coming back to you, how does NABERS Water complement some of the other rating schemes that are out there, such as GRESB and Green Star, and the other assessments across the NABERS suite?
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. I'll mention GRESB, Green Star, and WELL. So with GRESB, the water rating adds to the environmental component of that assessment, and as does the energy, waste, and carbon neutral ratings in the NABERS suite. And the indoor environment rating can also be used towards the health and wellbeing parameter. Within Green Star, NABERS water rating is part of the criteria for energy and environmental performance. And again, we work closely with the GBCA to make sure the tools work well together. And similarly for the WELL standard, they have a requirement for water quality, accessibility, and conservation. So a high NABERS water rating can support the WELL standard quite well. So, and then as to your question about the internal synergies, the NABERS water rating goes well along with an energy and waste rating towards a carbon neutral, NABERS carbon neutral rating. So that's via the Climate Active program. So these tools are quantifying the carbon emissions created from the building's operations, and the carbon neutral tool calculates the required offsets. So, so yeah, that's across different sustainability programs and internal tools.
Thanks for that. So, Dale, from a property owner's perspective, what are some of the primary drivers for prioritising water efficiency across the portfolio? How are investor and tenant pressures influencing some of these initiatives?
Well, so I guess to put things in context, in the last 12-month period, we consumed roughly 1.25 billion litres of water across the group. So it's a sizable amount of water in anyone's language. And obviously that correlates with tens of millions of dollars worth of water-related costs. So there's clearly a financial benefit incentive for us to be driving down our consumption as much as possible. I guess, if you're talking of, say, stakeholder pressures and stakeholder drivers, for tenants, we do find that increasingly tenants coming into, or prospective tenants, are actually looking to see how well our assets are performing from a water efficiency perspective. So clearly, they'll be looking at what our NABERS ratings are, history of NABERS ratings. From an investor perspective, that's something we see a lot of, and so sustainability is obviously very important to GPT. We think it's part of our DNA, and I think that that sort of resonates quite well with investors. But yeah, same thing. Increasingly, we are hearing more from investors about water, and it's on a number of fronts, I guess. Investors are interested to make sure that that our assets that we have are resilient and will be resilient in a water scarce future under climate change. So we prepare climate adaptation plans for all assets that we own and manage, and so we do take a very considered look at what water scarcity could look like in the future. And then similarly, we're doing a lot of work on nature-related measures. So we're pretty well advanced with the framework for the task force for nature-related financial disclosure. Within that, we've got a number of water-related metrics and targets that we've set, and one in particular has a pretty considered view as to what our reductions need to be with respects to fresh water usage, withdrawals from nature. So that's something that does drive it. And beyond that, I mean, amongst that, it's similar. Our buildings operate within communities, and there has been times in the past where some of our retail assets have been involved in helping out local communities for like natural disasters, flooding and bushfires and other things like that, cyclones, for instance, as well. So we do operate within the communities, and I think, understandably, people within the community would be quite aghast that we're in, especially periods of high drought, that buildings such as ours and others obviously are using large quantities of drinking water still to flush toilets and using cooling towers. So, we are driven to sort of drive down as much as we can from a whole range of factors, I guess.
Well, we've got questions are flying in.
Add to that one. Sorry, Anthony, to what Dale mentioned.
Howie.
Like we've also seen, it's interesting. We've seen an increasing trend across our clients as well. GPT obviously is a client of ours. Energy was a big focus for many years, and we've seen huge strides in the industry of trying to drive that level of energy efficiency improvements. And then we're increasingly seeing water now becoming a bigger topic of everyone saying, okay, well, how do we kind of improve our water ratings? I think to Karl's point of like what gets measured gets managed. Given that something like close to 90% of all assets that are energy rated already have a water rating, it's like front and center of people going, well, how can I've already got a 5-star energy rating, how can I get from a 3 to a 4 to a 5-star water rating? But in particular, an increasing trend we've seen is in the area of financing and on the Treasury Department in terms of sustainability linked financing. And typically with most of the KPIs and the sustainability performance targets that are being tied to that, energy component as well as a water component, in most of them will actually have that as well. So they're tying financing objectives to that water rating as well.
We've got a bunch of questions coming in from our audience, which is fabulous. So I'm just going to quickly throw a couple of things to Howie. What are some of the operational challenges that you've seen clients face, and what sort of equipment does the CIM platform need in order to be able to monitor water consumption?
Good question. I might answer the latter question first. So if the smart water meter any smart water meter, as long as it's connected to the building management system, and that's where your BMS technician should be able to do it, we're able to basically extract that into the PIG platform, or if it's connected to an energy management system. So that really is, I'd say to talk. So it doesn't really matter what hardware; it's completely hardware agnostic or protocol agnostic, or if it's a Honeywell water meter or a Siemens or Schneider, or a System X one, doesn't really matter, as long as it's connected to your building management system, and an analytics provider such as us or anyone can basically get that data out. In answer to the first question of some of the operational challenges that we're actually seeing, some of them I've spoken to, and Dale mentioned. I'd say there's really 3 of them. The first one is in being able to measure water usage. The integration one is key to that question that was just asked. A lot of people forget about actually connecting the hardware once they've installed it. So they'll get all the smart water meters and then not plug it into the BMS. and then treat it almost like a dumb embedded network meter. So we've seen just so many meters there that have been purchased and installed, and no one bothered checking if it was actually reading correctly, so they weren't set correctly. So it's important that once the hardware is actually installed, to actually connect it in. Another surprising aspect that we've learned is that already a lot of assets and infrastructure have had this installed for a very long time, and they just don't know about it because the assets changed hands or was under previous operation management. So it's important, if you're an owner and operator, to ask the question first: do we already have this infrastructure installed? If so, can we please plug it into the system so that we can get that data out? The second part of the measuring one is I'd say the 80-20 rule. That image that I just showed, one overlooked point is people don't realize how much cooling towers actually consume in terms of water usage. And usually when people endeavor in the design phase of these projects, they'll start with first the smallest tenancies, the cafe or the downstairs retail shop, and they'll install the water metering, not realizing, or the bathroom on the end of trip, not realizing that the big guzzler, 50% of it's upstairs in the cooling towers, and kind of neglecting that. So really starting out with these projects is to install it on the biggest consumers first, before going off and installing it everywhere else. The other kind of two operational challenges that I touched on is stopping leaks. Is first you have to be able to detect them, and being able to detect them in real time is incredibly challenging. So really making sure that not just being able to detect it, but making sure the operations teams know about major leaks as early as possible to stop them is incredibly important as well. And then the other hard one that Dale mentioned as well on some of the challenges with the NABERS water rating, particularly in retail centers, is it's whole of building, it's not base building. And as I kind of showed you in that illustration, more than 50% of the, 40% of the usage is not controlled by the building owner. And so how do you affect that change? How do you change tenant behavior on that? And one aspect that we've seen very successful is you just start charging them for it, right? If people are all of a sudden starting to pay for their water usage, they will change that level of behavior, or being able to find out if there's actual leaks for it. So even if they're not charging for it, but being able to just let them know that they're using a lot of water overnight, or there's they have these leaks, can have a huge impact in changing that level of tenant behavior. Anthony, you're on mute.
That's a great lead in. Yeah, that's a great lead in for the question that's come from our audience. I'm going to start with Karl and then hand the question over to Dale, because it's a double header that both of you will probably have a view on. So Karl, under NABERS Water for Office, why is tenant usage included in the base building measure when the building operator doesn't actually have any real control over the water use? And then Dale, perhaps if you could answer, because someone has asked, does GPT charge for the water use by its tenants? So maybe Karl, if you want to start with the why do you measure it, and then Dale, who's paying?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Anthony. So in the benchmarking process, when we're expanding into a new sector, we will consider energy and water together, and also the scope of the building type, whether that's whole building or getting into tenancies and base buildings. So depending on the availability of data and the I guess the presence of sub-metering and the ability to split out that data, that determines the course of the benchmarking and what sort of scope that tool will be built as. So as we've seen for shopping centres, hotels and offices, that water does end up being a whole building rating due to the data that we're getting, or the availability of data.
Maybe then Dale, who's paying the bill?
Well, it's fair to say that water, like all utilities, is paid by the tenant in one form or another. It really comes down to how the lease is constructed. So in some cases, it's always part of outgoings, but increasingly, and sort of how we touched on it before, with the type of leases, how it be structured, it's much more fair for both parties if you have a user pays type of approach. Because in the past, if say, for instance, in a retail environment that you're just working on the area that a tenancy holds, that's nowhere near fair and equitable, because you could have a hairdresser and like a women's apparel shop, both of the same size, but one's going to use a lot more water than the other. So it depends on how the older leases were written as to how that's actually done. So yeah,
that's a great point. We've seen some of the data come through, and like a big box retailer would use 1/10 of the water of a much smaller car wash downstairs.
Yeah.
It's just unbelievable. Or even one overlooked one is dentists, like not realizing how much water use dentists use, or particularly the Asian restaurants with basically wok burners are just enormous water guzzlers. So knowing how much that person uses, you have to measure it to be able to kind of charge efficiently for it, rather than a stationary paying the same rate.
Well, Peter Drucker did famously say you can't manage what you don't measure, and I think Karl and Dale have both said that you can't improve what you don't measure either. So it's not just about measuring, but it's also about trying to find the scope for improvement. We've got a question for you, Karl, on NABERS assessments. This has come from someone who operates hotels and has recently undergone their first NABERS assessment. They said they understand that that the water rating does not consider hotel occupancy. So as such, if occupancy improves by 10% in the next year, and therefore water consumption increases, won't it be harder for them to maintain the same rating?
Thanks, Anthony. I'm put on the spot a bit with my knowledge of the hotel tool. And I had an idea that... Yeah.
We can always, if you prefer, we can actually link you up with the person who asked that. And
yeah, that'd be great. And
if
I
it's
can...
an easier question to do offline afterwards.
Yeah, I'd love to pull out all the parameters that go into that assessment, into the algorithm, because then we can give a much better answer. Thanks, Anthony.
But it's important.
No worries,
that whole occupancy is very important. Like anyone who's tracked their NABERS water ratings pre and post COVID would know that it's almost like water volumes actually were a de facto measure of occupancy in our assets. So it's very closely tied to occupancy. Yes.
Yeah, we definitely noticed
I see that with my home water bill.
We definitely noticed that in our offices in the return from COVID, as occupancy rates increased. Those water ratings were definitely a sign of increased occupancy.
So, Howie, we talk about some of the product and some of the product developments doing. Can you talk to us about some of the new features that you guys are exploring or use cases you're exploring that will further simplify water management for building owners?
Oh yeah, lots. So excited. We're active in development. We'll actually be launching in the next couple of weeks our ratings feature. So super excited about that, which will allow people to centralize all their ESG ratings into the platform. And to that point, we're having all their NABERS energy ratings, water ratings, waste, indoor environment, LEED, BREEAM, kind of any type of rating type inside the building, and be able to see the whole history of that. We find it incredibly important to have all stakeholders knowing how that building has performed in terms of the ratings and where they're going in terms of a NABERS scenario analysis as well. So that one's coming soon. And we're really excited about kind of just getting all those water ratings inside the platform. So if you are a customer of CIM, you will get access to that. That's going to be released to all users. In fact, all the features I'm talking about will be released to all existing customers and future customers of CIM. We'll be rolling out alert notifications, which is a very exciting feature, which will allow users to be able to self-serve manage, be able to send the right issues to the right person at the right time. So by way of example, being able to send cooling tower leaks to a mechanical contractor to notify them immediately, to send to plumbers any tenant leaks, and to send to BMS contractors any faulty sensors. So being able to customize the type of issues being sent to the individual, being managed on that. So that's been a hugely in-demand feature. And really trying to streamline that workflow process is very exciting for us. We'll be releasing impact labels, which will clearly highlight and signify in our alerts in our platform whether the issue is a water-related issue, a reliability issue, a safety issue, and being able to get better stats on that. So that's coming soon as well. And also we're improving our self-generation of water usage reports. So a big one for cost recoveries is being able to see the month-on-month usage in terms of tenant usage and how that's changed, and being able to drill into that. And we'll be building that into the platform as well. So lots of stuff across all those pillars of being able to improve and monitor and benchmark water efficiency coming very, very soon. In the next couple of months, all these features will be landing. So if you have any questions or want to learn a bit more for existing customers, reach out to your customer success manager to find out about it. For new customers on this call who are interested in learning about how we help customers with water efficiency, you can reach out to, go on our website and reach out to anyone, either support@cim.io or reach and contact us or myself.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Howie. So, Dale, one of the other questions that's come in from the audience is, how do you sell water efficiency projects when water costs are low and the ROI is quite high?
Yeah, it is a perennial problem. Water, is so hellishly undervalued and underpriced, and that. So, I guess when we're working on business cases, we're trying to look at the externalities of water projects. So, so into that goes, obviously the impacts on neighbours. It talks to things like and even that in itself, the outgoings across the board has a big impact on that. So we're trying to actually keep our outgoings down in accordance with what industry would expect for, say, a premium grade or an A grade building. Look, I guess also by and large, a lot of it will come down to, especially if it's a life cycle upgrade, you do need to understand, the commercial metrics of replacing, swapping out an inefficient system for a newer system. But as I said, there's a whole range of things that touch on what we see as important. So above and beyond just the simple payback figures, as I said, we've got the neighbours and also our commitments to things like I said for TNFD, our corporate reporting, and that sort of goes to things such as GRESB and other type of benchmarking systems as well.
Thanks for that. And just one other question that's come up that's kind of a bit related to that is, what are some of the most efficient initiatives that aren't CapEx related?
Very good. Yeah, look, part of what I've been endeavouring to do in these water blueprints is focusing on those no-cost, low-cost initiatives. So at the very starting point, it's a lot of the things we've actually been speaking about today. It's the metering and monitoring. So assuming that you've got a fair degree of metering in, it's just those savings. We think we've done quite well since our benchmarking began in, say, 2005. We've reduced our intensities by something like 65%, but we know that there's so much more that can be done. So it's a matter of putting in alerts where you do have metering. But even if that image I showed before, that was the incoming mains meter. So and most people will have access to that. So you don't necessarily need to have reams and reams of sub-meters hanging off your systems, but that should give you the ability to say, hang on, something's going wrong here. And that's when you call in your BMS contractors, your MEC services guys to look into, because the best form of water savings is water elimination. And that's effectively through those leak management systems. But yeah, low cost stuff, as I said, it might only be just minor tweaks. We've stumbled across faulty irrigation controllers. Now, you wouldn't think you'd use much irrigation. I found a problem in one of our Parramatta assets that used 300,000 litres of water for irrigation because the solenoid had broken and it hadn't been picked up. They're harder things to pick up. But as I said, if you go back to your overarching profiles off the main meter, it'll give you some idea that something's not working, and there will be some time and effort that's required to sort of drill down and look at your operations and try to nail those. But
yeah, I might tag on to that, and Dale's 100% correct. Like, if you even just install a smart meter on your mains and your cooling towers, just two of those, you're going to capture 80% visibility of any major leaks before they actually happen. And you probably already have them in your buildings. You just haven't kind of plugged them in, or you haven't actually been analyzing that data. If you don't have them, the cost is becoming increasingly cheaper now. Like, we're seeing quotes from BMS technicians of as low as $1,000 an individual meter to basically get that installed, labor, and actually plugged into the system. And then selfishly for my plug, it's ultimately like having that with a monitoring solution like CIM to be able to let you know is increasingly affordable. Doesn't require any major CapEx works or anything to get that done.
I'm mindful of time for our panelists. We've got about 4 or 5 minutes left up our sleeves, and we've just had a question that's kind of addressed to everybody that I want to jump into. So I'll read the question out, and then maybe we'll go Karl, Dale, and then Howie to answer it. So the question is, it's challenging for tenants such as F&Bs to save water due to the business nature and to adopt water efficient fittings. This is also affecting the GRESB scoring for water performance, which includes tenant consumption. I just wanted to hear your view on this from the panel. So maybe Karl, do you have a view on that question or that comment that's come in from one of our audience members?
It's hard for me to comment on the GRESB involvement, but yeah, because the NABERS tool evaluates 12 months of data, and I guess the discussion with the tenant is something that ideally would be ongoing about what overall consumption would be, and that would be an ongoing discussion with the tenancy. But maybe I could pass to Dale for more knowledge of what's happening.
Yeah, I can sympathise with our food and beverage tenants. You know, they're copying it on a whole range of areas. I guess that many of those operators who come into a GPT asset have a good understanding at the outset, because we provide like fit out guidelines or building user guides. So we would often mandate things such as, hey guys, you can't use water cooled woks. So but beyond that, I mean, for our office tenants, we would sort of say, look, we're really keen for everybody to use very water efficient dishwashers and other appliances like that. Where there is potential for rebates, and I think this is where things are a bit skinny compared to energy. You know, there's a lot of more rebates going around for environmental certificates for energy and emissions reductions through appliances, and you can get them in your home. You know, like if you have better performing TVs or dishwashers, but it's not as great, I guess, for water. So unfortunately, some of those upfront costs are hard to sort of drop down. Yeah, look, I don't know. It's us, I guess, helping to sell the concept of that, reducing that degree of tenant outgoings by helping them to reduce water within their tenancies themselves. So, and some tenants may not necessarily be aware of that. So that sort of falls to us to make sure that we've got a pretty robust and regular engagement and awareness training, I guess, with our tenants to help them reduce their own exposure to water costs.
Did you have anything you want to add to that, Howie?
Yeah, that's a good one. What Dale mentioned is like they may not be aware of the water usage. So particularly with food and beverage, in particular restaurants and cafes, again, it's really simple. I just kind of come back to it. It's stopping the leaks, right? And like a lot of the times they don't know that they're having leaks, or they don't know that some of the staff are actually wasting excessive amounts of water. I mean, just pull this up as you guys were saying this. Like here's just a great example of water usage across a food and beverage tenancy in a restaurant. Can you see my screen there, Anthony? So you can see that major increase in water usage. So you can arguably there's ways to improve the efficiency in terms of the base load, but also leaks can have disastrous impacts. And as you can see here, just having, you know, in this food and beverage tenancy, having leaks kind of come through this entire tenancy and water usage from pipes and leaks. So a lot of them just don't know that this stuff is actually happening, or they do and they're not raising it, which is probably even worse. So having that monitoring in place, letting tenants know that they're using abnormal amounts of water usage than they are is almost the first instance. We are in so many shopping centers and sites where we go on and realize, oh my God, like there's no reason why this sushi restaurant should be using that much water at 2 a.m. Like there's just zero reason. And if you reach out to the tenants, they will be they're almost always incredibly thankful for being told there's a leak and they can send a plumber to fix it. So
excellent.
Just stop the leaks.
Sounds like a political statement as well as one for food and beverage. Karl, one final question before we wrap up. Do you have any track on how COVID impacted NABERS water ratings for office buildings?
It was really, as we mentioned before, with the occupancy aspect of the calculations that, and it did affect water more so than electricity. That was a trend we saw, especially when people started returning to the office, that the electricity and from our side, I mean, we don't see the exact usage, but you could imagine that the building is still operating, maintaining temperature and comfort conditions, and plant and equipment is working, but without a lot of toilets being flushed and hand basins. I guess there was that component of it, and it wasn't a huge jump in the ratings, but it was visible. So that's what we saw from our side.
Well, thanks for that, Karl. want to thank everybody who's attended. It's fantastic that we, as you can be aware, we do prepare for these webinars, and we do have a few things up our sleeve to, lubricate the conversation, if you like. But we had so many questions come in from the audience today. I don't think we really got to very many of the questions we'd prepared for. So I'm not sure how that made our panelists feel today, but I'm very thankful for it because it keeps it super interesting for everybody. So thank you to everybody who's attended. Thank you to our panelists, to Karl, Dale and Howie, for sharing their insights and for really answering a huge number of questions without any notice and leaning on their experience and expertise in this area. So thanks very much, gentlemen. Before we close out, there's going to be a very short survey once the webinar ends. We really appreciate it if everybody who's attended today could fill that in. It helps us hone what we do for future events. I know we're going to have another webinar come up in the next little while, so please keep an eye out for that through CIM's LinkedIn page or your inbox. But with that, thanks very much, everybody, for your time and attendance, and I look forward to seeing you all again in future.
Thanks, Anthony.
Thanks, Anthony.
Thanks,
Howie,
everyone.
Dale.
Thanks, Karl.
Thanks very much.
Everyone.
Bye.